How's it going, everyone? My name is Dylan Coventry from Coventry Racing, and today I'm going to show you how to change the oil and the oil filter on your dirt bike. Maybe it's been a while and you needed a little refresher, or you're just not sure exactly how to change the oil, or maybe you're just watching this video because you just love dirt bikes and you love motocross content, and that's okay. No matter what the case is, today I'm going to show you how to change the oil on your dirt bike, and as reference, I'm using my GasGas MC250F, the factory edition, for this video. Now please remember that not exactly every bike is going to look just like this one when it comes to the position of the drain bolt or exactly the oil filter or anything in that regard, but this is going to be a good reference point for the oil change that you're going to do on your dirt bike as well as the oil filter. So without further ado, let's dive right in. When you go to drain the oil on your dirt bike, there are two different locations on this bike in particular where you will drain the oil from your bike. As for the oil filter, there's only one location, and I will show you that in just a moment. Drain bolt number one is located on the side of the motor. It's at the very bottom of your casing, and it's located right where my finger is pointing, and there's a metal cage attached to this bolt, which will come out whenever you pull this bolt out. I will show you that in just a moment and explain what that cage does. Drain bolt number two on this bike is actually located in the back of the casing, still at the bottom as well. As you can see, my finger pointing directly at it. You might not be able to see at the moment, but you will see in just a few that the drain bolt actually has a washer and a magnetic tip on the end of it. The magnetic tip will grab any metal shavings or anything inside the motor that shouldn't be there that's cycling through your oil, and it goes exactly to that part of your bike to grab those shavings. The washer itself needs to be examined to make sure it doesn't have any dents or damage or cracks or anything along those lines, or else it will need replaced. Now that you know the locations of your drain bolts and the oil filter, it's important, in my opinion, to get a stand like this triangle stand or to rest your bike up against a wall so that way it has a spot to actually rest without having a stand directly underneath the drain bolts. Now that the bike is on the triangle stand, we can start draining the oil. This will be the first drain bolt that we're going for, and this one is 13 millimeters. Now, as I mentioned earlier, whenever you remove this bolt, there's this metal cage that's attached to the backside of the bolt. Now, this essentially will grab some of the metal shavings inside your oil, kind of let you know if there's wear and tear or any damage going on inside of the engine itself, which is very important to make sure that you really look over this metal cage. And before you reinstall this, it's good to take something like parts cleaner, carb cleaner, or anything along those lines and spray it down so that way this is all cleaned up before it goes back into that port right there. Now we can reinstall this bolt with the metal cage back into its location. Our next bolt is located at the back, as I mentioned before, and this is a 1/2-inch wrench. As I mentioned with this bolt, it has this washer here, as well as the magnetic tip at the very end, which is located right here. This magnetic tip is going to let you know if there are metal shavings, any wear and tear, any damage, or anything that you shouldn't be finding in your oil should be located right here. As you can see with this bolt, this makes it a little bit easier to see, but there is just some dark oil there. There aren't any metal shavings or anything along those lines. But like I mentioned earlier, it's important that we now have to inspect that washer that's located right here. Now there is oil on it, and that's okay. That's totally fine, totally normal. But it's important to make sure that you don't have any cracks, dents, damage, or anything that could really show that this needs to be replaced. Now, if you are someone that would like to make sure that you replace it after every oil change, that's completely fine. There's literally nothing wrong with that. I personally try and make these last as long as possible, but that's a personal preference. After thorough inspection and some cleaning, I made sure that the washer is looking good and the end of this bolt is looking good as well. So as you can see, this is what it should look like before you put it back into the bike and get it ready for the new oil. All I'm doing here is reinstalling the drain bolt back into its location, and we will get that tightened down and torqued to its specifications. So now we can move on to our oil filter. The oil filter, as I mentioned, is right behind this cover right here, which is held in by these two bolts. So we're going to remove those bolts right now, and then we will get the oil filter out. After you've allowed the oil to drain from the oil filter bay, you can remove the oil filter, which is this piece right here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to use needle nose pliers to remove this oil filter because it's a little challenging to remove it with just your fingers. The oil filter is very important to look over as well because just like everything else so far, you need to make sure that there are not any metal shavings showing or shiny bits and pieces inside this filter in between these cracks and these lines. Now some of that shine that you're seeing right there is just some of the oil that's been sitting in between the actual filter itself. As like I mentioned, if you notice that there are metal shavings, you need to start considering what might be going on inside the engine's casing itself. When installing this oil filter, it is a directional oil filter. So this end here, this piece at the end will go to the back, this little black rubber piece. And when you put this new oil filter in, you should be able to hear a little click, just like that. Now we can reinstall our oil filter cap. Now that the oil's been drained from our 2 drain bolt locations, as well as our oil filter location, we've replaced the oil filter, checked the caging on the other drain bolt, as well as the magnetic tip. We can now get to installing the new oil. So now that we've moved to the other side of the bike, we can see the oil cap right here located at the top of our clutch cover on the right side of the engine's casing. We can remove the oil cap and make sure to clean it as well as to set it to the side for right now. Before you fill your bike with oil, you need to make sure that you have the correct grading and the correct type of oil for your bike specifically. My bike specifically calls for fully synthetic 4T's 10W50 oil. It does recommend using Motor X for this bike, and that's exactly what I'm going to use today. You don't necessarily have to use this brand. You can use other brands. However, make sure that you base your oil off of what your owner's manual recommends for the correct grading. As I mentioned, this is 10W50 for this bike. That is not the same for every single bike out there. And you do not have to necessarily use this brand, but it's important to stay consistent and use the same brand that you use from the beginning. So that way you make sure your bike is clean, it's using the same oil, and all these parts and moving pieces inside the engine are getting the right lubrication. The consistency is very, very important. So again, very important before you just start filling your bike up with oil. And again, I'm referencing my owner's manual to fill my bike up with the correct amount. My bike's owner's manual recommends that I use 1 liter of oil. So that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. And now that you've filled the oil on your bike, you can see down below there is an oil fill glass, which my finger's pointing at it right now, right below the clutch cover. If your bike has this is a good time to go ahead and check to make sure that the oil level has raised all the way up and is completely full. Now once you've done that and you're sure that your oil is good, you can now reinstall the cap on your clutch cover here. And once you've got that reinstalled and tightened back down to where it needs to be, you can check to make sure that there's no leaks of oil on the bottom side of the bike where you had the drain bolts, as well as checking where you just replaced your oil filter. And now you need to start the bike up to cycle the oil through the engine to make sure that the bike is actually getting oil in all the right places, as well as to make sure that you don't have any leaks, like I said, from the drain bolt locations, as well as from the oil filter location. And just like that, you've got your oil and your oil filter changed on your dirt bike. Now this is different for every model, so please keep that in perspective. However, this is a very good general baseline for most dirt bikes out there, considering especially a lot of these 4-strokes. You're gonna be changing the oil and your oil filter a lot. Now, there are people that are gonna tell you to change your oil every single ride. There's people that are gonna tell you to change your oil filter every single time you change your oil. That is all up to you. In my opinion, I would reference the owner's manual to make sure that you are doing the correct time frame for changing your oil filter, and every other basic maintenance on your bike. You don't have to do this, but like I said, if you want to use my method, the way I change my oil and my oil filter, at least on my 4-stroke dirt bike, is I change the oil every 5 hours and I change the oil filter every 10 hours. So I change the oil at 5 hours, 10 hours, 15, 20. The oil filter I have changed at 10 hours and 20 hours. So If that helps you get a better idea for the time frame that I actually do this stuff, or maybe this doesn't help, I don't know. Like I said, hopefully this was a informative video and kind of gave you a little bit better perspective on what you should expect when changing the oil and the oil filter on your dirt bike. And thank you for watching today. Please leave a comment if you think I should do things differently, better, whatever the case may be. Just leave a comment, let me know what you thought of the video. And once again, my name is Dylan Coventry from Coventry Racing. If you enjoy motocross content, come back to Coventry Racing for more videos to come.